Hello, my friends. This is the art of prepping. Hope everyone's doing good today. Hope everyone's staying warm. That's what the topic is today. It's about how to protect against the cold. I have 12 tips, and let's just jump right into it. I mean, a lot of this is going to be very helpful just in everyday life during the winter. And at the time of this recording, it's not even winter yet, but sometimes fall and early spring can be brutal, depending on where you live. And where I live, it can be rather brutal. And so for the last few weeks, where I live, and I mean, we're just about 3 weeks away from actually winter, but I mean, we're in like below freezing temperatures. And so this can be very serious. And so we need to do certain things to hedge against any kind of cold weather injuries or illnesses. And so just like you can get overexposure and have heat exhaustion and have sunburns, you can have the same thing with the cold, but they call it different things. They call it like hypothermia or frostbite. So what we have here are various things that you can easily do to help you. Now, some of these things are for different situations. Some of these things are for everyday life, and some of these things are for survival situations. So let's just get into it. Number one, your body needs energy to create heat for the ability to stabilize the core body temperature. So you need to make sure you eat enough when you're out in the cold. And so one of the easiest ways to get rid of the chills or the shivers is to eat something. I mean, of course, in combination with other things. I mean, if you're just out there in freezing weather, literally, with a t-shirt on, then that's a problem. But let's just say, though, that if you have the proper clothing and you're getting a little bit chilled, it just might be that you're hungry and your body's having a difficult time getting enough energy. So high caloric foods, in particular those with healthy fats. Fats have a lot of energy. Number two, wear layers. Very simple concept, but so few people do this. I literally see people walking around with just a t-shirt on, a long sleeve t-shirt, and it's freezing cold out. Or if they do have a second layer, it's like some kind of cotton, sweatshirt, right? That's really loose and it's not holding any kind of air in. It's not trapping air. And so the way that layers work is that typically you have a base layer, which is your moisture wicking layer. So it draws the moisture from your skin and it helps to move it away from the body so it can evaporate so that your body can stay warm. And then you typically have one or more inner layers. Okay, this is going to be your insulating layers that's made up typically of some kind of fleece or wool. And then you have your outer layer. And in between the base layer and your outer layer, that insulating layer is actually trapping that air and keeping that warm. So it insulates the body. But the outer layer, though, it's like your shell. It's like an outer shell that helps, at least this is, the whole concept, is to help protect against wind and rain or moisture. So wear layers, and you can always take a layer off if you have too much. But if you don't have what you need, then you can get yourself into trouble. And this is where you find that the research all points toward this, is that overexposure, in particular hypothermia, is the number one direct and indirect cause of death in the great outdoors. And I mean, it's number one by a long shot. Like it's very obvious what the problem is. So people are not wearing the proper clothing and in the proper way. So high caloric foods, wear layers, and wear dark clothing. If you think about it, if you have a piece of clothing that reflects light, that reflects heat, versus one that absorbs it, well, what do you think is going to happen? Which clothing is going to be warmer? Well, the one that absorbs the sunlight, the solar energy, the heat. And so you definitely want to wear dark clothes. Get the darkest clothes that you can find in whatever it is that you enjoy to wear. And so during the winter, dark clothes is very good. During the summer, light colored clothing is very good. So it goes without saying, though, for a lot of people, but this is something that you just don't see. You don't see sometimes a lot of people wear darker clothing in winter. Number 4, shelter in a small space. So if you're in a survival situation, if you had several shelter options to pick from, I would pick a shelter option that is going to be a small enclosed space so that you can work with it easier, so you can manipulate the space and the air easier, right? So you can insulate it and you can warm that space easier than a larger space. Now, if we're talking about a home, and for whatever reason you need a shelter in your home or someone else's home because the power's out and it's very cold outside, I would go in an inner room, an inner space of the home. And I'd find me a very small space. Maybe it's like an inner room that has a walk-in closet. And I would insulate that walk-in closet. And I would use that to be a point of refuge. And so just with your own heat that your body puts out can warm up a space, a small space. So it is going to be beneficial, though, if you have additional resources, though, right, to warm a space up. And this goes into my next point here, which is candles. Just having a few candles can make a big difference in a very small space. It could be within a small tent that is reinforced with extra insulation that is, for example, just well insulated. You could just put a few covers, a few reflective blankets over top of your tent and burn a couple candles inside, and that's going to go a long way, especially if you're doing this inside. Now, be careful with the candles, obviously. If you have candle holders or a candle lantern, it's going to be much safer. And there's other options as well. But don't overlook candles. And always just be aware, though, of the air quality. Every once in a while, you want to exchange for some fresh air into that room, in that space. Another thing to think about here is a super shelter, especially when you're outside. And this can be done by using transparent material. It could be like plastic sheeting that you put over, let's say, for example, your tent, and you trap air in between like your tent and this plastic sheeting. And you can warm that air through radiant heat from like your campfire. And this is something that's really interesting because, a lot of people talk about, well, if I got real cold, I'll just make a fire. But then there's a lot of people who do it and they still don't get warm because they haven't really understood the concept of reflecting and containing the heat that comes off of that fire. So you can make campfire reflectors to focus the heat to where you want it to go. And this can be done with rocks. It could be done with aluminum foil. It could be done even with debris, pieces of like limbs and trees. And then, so if you have the heat more directed and focused, then you need to contain it. And this is where a super shelter, or just even if you have your tent, it needs to be close enough and it needs to be able to really, gather that heat and to store it. So definitely think about how you can do that. Another good tip is to have extra blankets and sleeping bags in your vehicle and in your home in case the power goes out. So you definitely want to do research ahead of time to know what kind of sleeping bag is appropriate for your area. And what you can do is really simple. It's just look in the database for your state and your local area of the coldest month of the year. And after you do that, you find what is typically the coldest time of that coldest month. and then you find a sleeping bag that the comfort rating, not the extreme rating, but the comfort rating meets that number. So for example, if the coldest it gets in your area is -20, then you want to find a sleeping bag that has a comfort rating of -20. And that typically is going to be about 20 degrees higher than the extreme rating, which is typically what you find in most sleeping bags. So if you find a sleeping bag that says -40, well, that would be good for a -20 environment for comfort. So we also have blankets. Now, a lot of people believe that polar fleece blankets are actually warmer than wool. But a true heavyweight 100% wool blanket is actually warmer than polar fleece. Now, some people say, well, it just feels warmer. And I will agree. It does feel warmer. And it feels softer. It's just overall nicer in a lot of ways than wool. But actually, when you do the test and you look at the real temperatures, it's actually warmer with the wool. So it's good to have both, though. That's what I have a bunch of extra fleece blankets stashed all over the house, in my vehicle, and the same as well for wool. Got some wool blankets everywhere. And, so you want to pair up your blankets and your sleeping bags. And, for me personally, I have a couple tents, available. So you can put one maybe in the vehicle. You can have a tarp as well. So basically have some resources at your disposal. This isn't that difficult at all. And a lot of this stuff doesn't cost that much. Now, a true heavyweight, like mil-spec wool blanket is not cheap, but it is something that you can literally use for the rest of your life. It can last a lifetime if you take care of it. So it's one of those things you buy once, cry once, and you're done. Another tip here that I think is very helpful is moderate movement. Moderate movement, and you can generate a little heat that way, if not a lot. Now, you got to be careful not to do too much. So in terms of heat generation, move around a little bit. Do some light stretching. Do some little bit of, various types of tasks around the house. If there's things you need to do them. Just don't overheat. But sometimes just moving will create enough friction that it'll generate some heat as a byproduct, and it will warm you up and increase your circulation, which is good for you, especially in the cold. Another thing to consider and to think about is the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect. Now, I'm not saying, you need to have a greenhouse to go into in the winter. But you'd be surprised, though, if you haven't experienced this, how warm a greenhouse can be even in the middle of the winter. But outside of the actual real greenhouse, you can just use the greenhouse effect to warm yourself. So allow sun into a space. And it could just be that you're in a vehicle that has maybe you have a lot of glass in your vehicle. Maybe you have a sunroof or something like that. There are vehicles now that have multiple sunroofs on their vehicle, which is quite interesting. But however it is, let some light in, especially if you can get some direct sunlight into that space, a contained space. It can warm it up in big ways. I mean, there's been many days during the winter that I get in my car and I'm like, what is going on? Why is it so warm in the car? Well, it was because the car was facing the sun, and it was in the sun for the last few hours. And my car isn't very large. It's just kind of more like on the smaller side of of an SUV. I guess it's like a compact SUV, really, sport utility vehicle. And it's just amazing how just within a few hours, you can warm up the whole cab of a vehicle. Just because it's sitting out in the sun, even though it's like freezing cold outside. So the greenhouse effect can be used in a lot of ways. So don't forget that. And the last thing I want to just bring up here is that there's a lot of, I don't want to say completely that it's misinformation or bad information. It's just that sometimes it's not completely correct. So when I was being raised, I tell you what, teachers and all different types of people around me that I was, raised around, told me about, you got to wear your toboggan. You have to have your scarf, because the bulk of your heat escapes through the top of your head. That's just what I was told. Now, this is not completely untrue. Yes, heat can escape from our head and our face. And when we exhale or when we talk, when we're out in the cold, there's heat that leaves. And yes, it's one of those things we have to be aware of. So I am not saying that you should not wear a toboggan. Yes, you should wear a toboggan. You should wear a scarf, maybe even a face mask and a hoodie if you have one on your jacket or your coat. But it's not the end all be all. It's not like, oh, you protect your head and your face and everything's fine. Because the research says this, that actually your limbs are a bigger threat to you when it comes to hypothermia than just your face and your head, which is really interesting. So you definitely want to make sure that you're wearing a jacket or coat that really protects your arms, right? And that you have protection for your hands. So actually have really good winter grade gloves, or if you really want to do better, get some mittens. I know that they're not the most popular thing these days, but they actually allow a better sharing of heat. And when your fingers are together, they can stay warmer. So mittens are actually even better than gloves. But I know a lot of people know that, but I just want to put that out there for those who didn't know. And then, our legs. How many people in the middle of winter walk around in just regular pants with no insulation, no insulating like extra layers, no like thermals, or no heavyweight clothing? They're just out there in just regular jeans in sub-zero weather. I mean, people are like this. And they wonder why their legs are all cold and they get cold. Well, you got to take care of your legs. And I think this possibly could be maybe one of the largest spots on the body that's really neglected, and that's the feet. A lot of people just do not have winter grade footwear, in particular insulated boots. I think it's super important to have those. Okay. And just one other little tip about, since we're talking about, trying to maintain and capture and hold on to our heat, core body temperature and just the heat, that our body makes, and trying to trap that air and everything, that it makes a lot of difference how you breathe. So when it's cold out, it's better to breathe through your nose because it allows a lot more heat to stay in the body than if you breathe with your mouth. Okay, so definitely breathe with your nose and not with your mouth in the winter. So I hope this helps a lot. You guys take care, stay warm, and I'll talk to you hopefully very soon. Take care.